Hello and welcome back. This is the week 15 lecture, and this is the final lecture of the semester. So that should make us feel pretty good. This is the last week of class, so hopefully by this point we've already done some work with our rough drafts. I'm hoping that everyone was able to participate in peer review. Based on the emails that I've been seeing over the weekend, I was CC'd on several exchanges, so I can see that a lot of you took part. Just a quick reminder for those of you who had a partner who did not participate, if you had a partner who did not respond to you, did not review your draft, you can always send your rough draft to me. And the reason we are turning our final drafts in at the end of this week is so we can work on these drafts for the entire week. I'm really trying to emphasize the final stage of the writing process, which we've talked about before, but I just want to remind you of it here at the end. We're talking about post-writing. Okay, that means revising and editing. So I've reposted some stuff on revising and editing in the week 15 module. So if you look in the overview, there's sort of two different things there. First, I'm talking about responding to your opponents. This is something that I meant to get to several weeks ago, but we just never really discussed it, or at least not at length. It's just a final thing to remember as you're continuing to sort of build and fine-tune your body paragraphs. Another thing that you need to do in your bodies as you're developing your argument, you need to respond to your opponents. A lot of these debates that you're participating in, they have sort of clear sides, right? They have clear positions, different positions, often opposing positions or opposing viewpoints. You know your viewpoint, you know your position, and you also need to know at least a little bit about some of those opposing positions. So this really goes back to ethos. If you remember, one of our artistic appeals that we've talked about, ethos is based on two things, really. It's largely grounded in your credibility as the author, and that credibility is based on two things: your knowledge of the subject matter, of the content, the topic, and your goodwill towards your audience. So if you're trying to demonstrate your knowledge, part of that is to demonstrate that you've done your homework, you've done your research, you've done the reading, and you've learned about what other people have to say. Remember last week, I think it was last week, I gave you that sort of analogy, told you to think about writing a research paper like arriving late at a party where a lot of people are already there and they're already talking, and you have to sort of enter into some of these already existing conversations. That's kind of what you're doing in the research paper. And listening to what other people say, that's part of it. Before you can really join into the conversation, you have to listen. That's kind of like research, right? You're learning what other people think, what other people say, and then you can insert your own opinion. So that's an important thing to remember, and some students overlook it. Just try to incorporate some kind of a response to an opposing viewpoint. And a good way to do this, if one of your sources represents a viewpoint or a position that's different than yours, you can use that source to kind of represent the entire view or that entire camp, and you can respond to them, you can provide a rebuttal to them. Now, in some cases, depending on your topic, you might not really feel like you have clear opponents. With some topics, you don't really have people on the other side saying, oh, that thing's good, or no, that thing's bad. But often the opponent, and I've talked to some of you about this in your conferences, in some cases, the opponent might be indifference or ignorance. It might be the public simply not knowing about the problem or not knowing what to do about the problem or the issue that you're addressing. So kind of think broadly when you're thinking about opponents. It's not always, me versus you. It's not always like a sporting event. Sometimes your opponent might just be a lack of knowledge, a lack of action, and that's what you're trying to address or change. So look at that material in the week 15 overview, and underneath it in the overview, I've included some stuff about revising and editing. And that's really what I want to focus on today. Again, we often get rushed at the end of a big paper project. So I'm trying to avoid that. That's why I made rough drafts due at the end of last week. And I know some of my due dates were off. I forgot to update some of my dates. So that's all cleaned up now. Everything should be clear now in Canvas. But some of you might have felt a little rush getting those rough drafts in. And if you didn't submit by Sunday, at the end of week 14, that's okay. Just get your drafts in over the course of week 15. I want to see everyone's rough draft. And like I said last week, I'm not necessarily grading for content. I'm going to take a quick look at what you have, and if it just looks like a complete train wreck, I will provide some feedback. I'll tell you, okay, what's happening. I'll ask what's happening. I'll tell you some things that you might need to do. But if you seem to be on the right track, I'm just going to kind of give you the credit and move on, because I don't really have time to provide personalized feedback to each one of these rough draft submissions. However, as I mentioned last week, if you want to send me your draft kind of off the books, just email it to me and I'll provide a lot more feedback. That's kind of more of a one-on-one thing outside of the actual class confines. As far as the rough drafts that you submitted, again, I'm not going to write a whole lot on those. I just want to see that everybody has a rough draft. I want to see that everybody is kind of going through the writing process in a sort of careful, thorough way. But don't feel like you're done with the rough draft. Even if you did submit on time, even if you did participate in peer review and you're feeling pretty good about where your draft is, that's great. But remember, you have another week. And that doesn't mean just take 6 days off and then scramble on the 7th day to get everything finished. I want you to use as much of this week as possible to fine tune and polish that rough draft. And again, I'm happy to help with that. Hopefully your peer review partner has already helped with that. But go back, even that, that draft that you submitted, you don't have to be done with it. Just because it's there in Canvas, you can continue to work with it. And again, I was hoping that you guys would have time to implement some of the changes that your peer review partner recommended. I was hoping you might be able to implement some of those changes before submitting the rough draft, but I realized things got a little tight over the weekend. Your partner might not have gotten back to you until Sunday, or they might not get back to you until Monday or Tuesday here in week 15. So that's okay. If the rough draft that you submitted at the end of last week was basically the same rough draft that you had sent to your peer review partner several days earlier, that's okay. But keep working with it. Keep working with it. Use your peer review feedback. You can use any feedback you get from me, and just keep looking at it. Keep working with it. And I have a few strategies that I want to share with you today. I think I've kind of already mentioned these things before, but I want to drive them home one last time. I'll keep this brief. It is our final lecture, but these are just some of the things that I want you to do this week here in week 15. So when we talk about revision, again, I've mentioned this before, revising and editing are slightly different activities. They're often lumped together and they both constitute post-writing, so they are similar. They're like cousins, and they often bleed into one another. So editing usually refers to the finding and fixing of mistakes, errors, sentence level errors primarily. So we're talking about punctuation issues, grammatical errors, perhaps citation errors. Editing is really focused on finding and eliminating mistakes. But revision is kind of more of a broad, all-encompassing concept. It can sort of include some of that editing work, but when we revise, we're really just making improvements to our draft, and we can do that in a lot of different ways. So I want to kind of walk you through the different levels of revision today, and I included this in the week 15 overview, but some of these terms might be a little unfamiliar, so I just kind of wanted to walk us through it now very quickly. So I kind of break revision down into 3 distinct levels. And I know it takes a long time to cover all of these levels, but we do hopefully have time because we have drafts and we have a whole week to work with those drafts. So when you're revising, kind of the first level is kind of the micro level, the small level, and that consists of individual sentences. So this really just means proofreading. When you're doing sentence level revision, it just means that you're going back through your draft and you're really scrutinizing individual sentences to make sure that they sound good, to make sure that they're clear, that they make sense, to make sure that they are complete sentences and you don't see any major errors. So you see, this is how revision and editing can kind of overlap, because when you're doing this kind of sentence level revision, sometimes what you're doing, obviously, is correcting mistakes. But not all sentences that you revise will necessarily be wrong. They won't necessarily all be grammatically wrong or whatever. In some cases, they might just be awkward. They might just be unclear. And they might just be too long, right? So sometimes when you revise a sentence, you're just doing it for the sake of clarity. You're not doing it because the sentence is a fragment or a run-on or whatever. You're doing it just because the sentence could sound better. It could look better. It could work better. So that's something that a lot of students overlook. They feel like, well, once I've written it, it's done, right? The rough draft is set in stone. I've written sentences. I've written paragraphs. Whether they're good or bad, I don't know, but they're there, and I can't do anything about them now. No, you can, and you can improve individual sentences, and sometimes it's quite easy. Sometimes you just need to cut off a couple of words. Sometimes you might want to combine 2 sentences that are currently short, isolated, separate sentences, but it would sound better to combine them. In other cases, we have a really long sentence, and it would sound better to break it up into several shorter sentences. Because if you remember what I was telling you about drafting last week, when we were getting started on our rough drafts, I said you don't really worry too much about punctuation or grammatical mistakes or even things like awkwardness when you're writing a rough draft. It's just important to get your content down on the paper, turning that outline, that plan, into an actual draft with paragraphs and everything. So when we're drafting, we're not always paying a lot of attention to our punctuation, to the way things sound, to the way things look. So that's why revision is so important. If you don't go back and revise a rough draft, that rough draft is going to be very rough and very faulty or problematic at times. So you have to start with sentence level revision and look at individual sentences, make some changes. Some sentences just need to go. And that's an important thing to remember about revision. Sometimes when you revise, you'll be adding content. In other cases, when you revise, you might be eliminating content. You might be cutting some content. And I know that's a painful thing to do, especially if we're struggling to meet the length requirement. But sometimes you're going to find individual sentences and maybe even paragraphs that just don't work. They don't sound right. They're not clear. They might not be connected very well to the other things that you're doing and talking about. So, you can bang your head against the wall trying to get this sentence or this paragraph to work. But sometimes it's better to just let it go, to just cut that content and write something new in its place. But again, revising doesn't necessarily mean, and it often does not mean, rewriting. when we're revising sentences, that doesn't mean we're starting from scratch, although sometimes we might want to. It often just means reworking things, rearranging things, maybe replacing one word with another, rearranging the order of some words, whatever. But yeah, sometimes we just have to cut sentences. So you start with sentence level, and then you move to the paragraph level. So we are very focused on individual paragraphs on this paper because we need good, strong, well-developed body paragraphs, and we need a lot of them. So we've already planned a lot of our bodies in the outline. So now that we have a rough draft, go back through the paragraphs that you've written, all of the paragraphs that you've written, the intro, the definition paragraph, if you have a policy paragraph, if you have a concluding paragraph, great, but mostly focus on the bodies and just see how they're working. One thing to focus, make sure that every body paragraph is accomplishing something. We often get a little bit distracted or aimless sometimes with our paragraphs. We'll be writing a paragraph. We might start the paragraph talking about one supporting point, and then we just kind of wander. We get distracted. It's a really long body. So maybe by the end of the body, we're somehow talking about a different supporting point. We're talking about something that's kind of unrelated to what we were talking about at the beginning of the paragraph. So again, that's something that you can catch during the revision process. You can notice things like that and say, whoa, this is really 2 paragraphs. I have everything in the first half of the paragraph. That kind of goes together. I have a good source. I'm making some good points. And then the second half of the paragraph, I'm doing something else. So that's not a big deal. Like, don't panic if you see that. Just break the paragraph and make it be 2 separate standalone paragraphs. That's an easy fix, and we need to do that sometimes. But make sure that all of your body paragraphs are unified. Again, try to identify topic sentences. Are you introducing what each paragraph is going to be about? And then are you sticking to it? Are you actually sticking to the supporting point that you're introducing in your topic sentence? Are you elaborating on it? Are you providing original claims about it? Are you also bringing in evidence to support your claims about it? Just double check all of that stuff. I guarantee that you'll find at least 1 or maybe 2 bodies that just aren't really doing anything. Like, they're just kind of hanging out. You're not making strong points in those bodies. You might not really have any evidence in those bodies. And not every single body paragraph has to have a bunch of evidence. But typically you want something. And if it's not evidence from an outside source, maybe an artistic appeal. Maybe a little bit of pathos that you develop yourself, but you need something going on in all of your body paragraphs. You're going to find some that are short and underdeveloped that might need to be combined with others, or they might just need to be cut. And then you're going to find some really long deluxe bodies that have a lot of good stuff, but again, that might actually be 2 separate bodies, or even 3. Remember our rule of thumb, we don't want any single paragraph in our papers to extend beyond a full page. That just becomes difficult for the readers. So again, if you see a paragraph, any paragraph that's longer than 1 full page, break it. Find a logical place to break that paragraph. And that's part of revision too. So do some paragraph level revision. And then the final stage is kind of the macro stage. It's just like the big picture questions. So this is where you really need to think again about your thesis. Ask yourself, is my argument working? Do I drive it home? Do I deliver it in an effective way? Do I have a policy? It's really time to think about policy if we haven't been already. I know when I met with a lot of you back in week 13, a lot of us didn't have our policies worked out yet. Well, by now you should. You need to have a policy paragraph in your rough draft. If it wasn't in the draft that you submitted at the end of last week, no big deal, but it needs to be in there soon. Like, it needs to be in there over the course of this week. You need to work on that policy. Is it clear? If you're developing it in your regular bodies and you talk about it a lot throughout your bodies, you might not need a standalone policy paragraph, but a lot of us will need it. And we need to make that policy clear, whether we're talking about it earlier or late in the policy paragraph at the end of our bodies. It's kind of up to you. The policy can really go anywhere. In my outline, I'm putting it near the end of the bodies, towards the end of the overall paper, but you don't necessarily have to do it that way. And as I've said with some of you, we've talked about this, some of you are making very policy-based arguments. So you're going to be really talking about your policy throughout a lot of your body paragraphs, and that's fine. Okay, but double check that policy. Make sure you have one. Make sure it's clear and pretty comprehensive. So the big picture questions are really about kind of, your argument, your evidence, your policy. Does everything work? And that's also a final chance to kind of check your formatting. Does everything look right? And check your citations. I can't stress it enough. Make sure you're double checking both levels of MLA citation, the in-text citations and the works cited page. And you might not have the works cited page right now at the beginning of week 15, and it's okay if you didn't have one as part of your rough draft, but obviously you need to submit it as part of your final draft. And remember, the works cited page does not count towards our length requirement, but it is included in the same document. So you need at least 7 pages in the research paper, 7 pages of original content, and then the works cited page will be page 8 at the soonest. It will be page 8. Okay, it'll be a separate page. It gets its own page, and you'll have all 8 of your sources, of course, listed on the works cited. So I believe last week in week 14, I posted a bunch of sort of new citation info. So I posted a document that shows you different in-text citations. I posted a new works cited example document. Again, just follow my lead. Follow my examples. Make sure your works cited page looks like mine in terms of it being double spaced, in terms of using the hanging indent, following all of our MLA rules. Again, use me, use my examples. You can use the Purdue OWL website as well. They have a great MLA section. So again, we're just doing our final checking here. We need to make sure our citations look good, make sure we have the in-text citations that we need, and make sure that our in-text citations correspond to all of the entries that are on the works cited page. So the final thing I want to say before I sign off is a final tip. And I know a lot of us aren't going to want to do this, but it's really an effective strategy as you're finishing up with your research paper. It's called the reverse outline. Some of you might have heard of it before. I might have mentioned it before. It's a simple concept. We all know what an outline is, and we all know the purpose of an outline is to give us a plan that we can use when we start drafting our actual paragraphs. Well, a reverse outline is an outline that you do after you've drafted a finished version of the paper. You can go back through, and as you're doing especially the paragraph level revision, all you need to do, this is very informal, but for the reverse outline, just jot down what you're doing in each paragraph as you read through it. So in the intro, okay, I'm introducing my topic, I'm establishing some basic facts about it, and then I'm establishing my thesis. Check. Those are all of the things that you need to do in the intro. So as you see that you're doing them one by one, just kind of check them off the list. And then you go down to the bodies. Okay, my first body paragraph. What am I doing in this paragraph? And if it's easy to answer that question, that's good. If you have clear topic sentences, it's clear the supporting points that you're talking about in the bodies, you have evidence. If it's all clear, great. First body, I'm talking about supporting point A. and I have evidence. Check. The next body, I'm talking about my second big supporting point, and I'm actually spending 2 paragraphs on that. So bodies 2 and 3, I see what I'm doing, check. But when you get to a paragraph in which you're not really doing anything, you're going to notice. So as you're doing the reverse outline, you'll notice the bad paragraphs. You'll notice the paragraphs that still need more work. You get to your 5th body, and it's kind of hard to say what you're doing. I don't know. I mentioned this one thing, but I don't develop it. I don't offer any detail. I don't really seem to be following up on my previous points. So this is a good way to spot potential problems. My 5th body, I'm not really doing anything. So make a note to go back and work more with that body. So if you can just scribble down what you're doing in each paragraph all the way through the end of your draft, then you take a look at that reverse outline, and it's kind of like you're making a schedule for future revision because you're identifying the things that you need to work on. Okay, these paragraphs are fine, but I need to work on my 5th body, my 7th body, my policy, and maybe my conclusion. The other paragraphs look pretty good. So see, it's good to get focused and organized when we revise and edit. It can feel overwhelming. These are big papers. It's hard to go through them all in a single sitting. But if you can do the reverse outline, again, that will help you zero in on the problem areas so you can really spend most of your time on those problem paragraphs. Maybe the other ones are good. You don't need to worry too much about those. But once you've done all of that revising work, you can then do a final round of proofreading. And I know this seems like a lot, but just one last proofreading session before you submit the final drafts. Again, these are long papers. There's more of a chance for errors. Anytime outside research is involved, there's more of a potential for errors. So just proofread it that final time. I always like to read out loud. I know that's kind of strange, but you're more likely to catch mistakes if you're reading it out loud. You're also more likely to catch awkward sentences. Again, not necessarily wrong grammatically, but you can hear when you're reading it, you can hear that some of these sentences just don't really work, and then you can revise them. But do a final round of editing so you can just double check your citations one last time. You might even want to do just a final citation check separate from everything else. But you should have time to do all of this post-writing. Again, if you want me to look at a rough draft, get in touch with me. We'll do that through email. If you took part in peer review, thank you. You'll receive full credit. And good luck, guys. This is it. We're down to the end. If you have final questions or concerns, let's talk. We can do another video conference, or we can just correspond through email. I hope you guys had a good semester. I enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of the class. I might see some of you again, but if not, enjoy your summer. And please let me know if you need any help here at the end.